The smoke is already thick when the first scream cuts through the house, and somewhere on the second floor, two children are crying out for help while alarms shriek through every hallway of this massive estate, and outside on the lawn, a woman is screaming at a golden retriever to come, to run, to get out of there, but the dog stands frozen at the front door, looking back into the flames, and then it does something no one expects. It turns around and runs straight back into the burning mansion, disappearing into the black smoke like it never heard a single command, and everyone watching feels their stomach drop because that dog just made a choice that doesn't make sense to anyone, and to understand why, we need to go back to the beginning, back before the fire, back before the panic, back to when this house was quiet in a completely different way. This mansion sat on 12 acres of perfectly landscaped property just outside of Connecticut, and it belonged to a man named Richard Hale, a billionaire who made his fortune in tech before most people even understood what the internet would become, and from the outside, this estate looked like something out of a magazine: towering columns, fountains, a 6-car garage, rooms that most of the staff had never even entered. But if you spent any real time there, you'd notice something strange. Something heavy, and that was the silence, not peaceful silence, but the kind of silence that fills a home when no one is really present even when people are technically there. Richard traveled constantly, sometimes gone for weeks, always chasing another deal, another acquisition, another meeting that couldn't wait, and his wife had passed away 3 years earlier from a sudden illness, which left behind 2 kids, Emma, who was 7, and Lucas, who had just turned 5, and these 2 children lived in this enormous house with rotating nannies, housekeepers, private tutors, and a father who loved them in his own way but never quite knew how to show it because grief had turned him inward, made him distant, made him believe that providing everything material somehow made up for everything emotional he couldn't give. And then there was the dog, a 4-year-old golden retriever named Beau, and Beau had come into the family when Emma was only 3, originally a gift from Richard's wife who had insisted that every child needed a dog to grow up with, and after she passed, Beau became something more than a pet. He became the one constant in those kids' lives, the one presence that never traveled, never had a meeting to rush off to, never handed them over to someone else when things got hard. Every night, Beau slept between their beds, and every morning, he followed them from room to room like a shadow, and when Emma cried because she missed her mom, Beau would press his head into her lap and stay there until she stopped, and when Lucas had nightmares, Beau would climb onto his bed and lie across his legs until the shaking stopped. And no one in that house really talked about how important Beau was because it was easy to overlook a dog in a home that had so many other things demanding attention, so Beau just kept doing what he did quietly, faithfully, without asking for anything in return. On the night of the fire, Richard was overseas, Tokyo, for a merger he said couldn't be postponed, and the kids were home with their nanny, a kind woman named Rosa who had been with the family for almost 2 years, and everything seemed normal at first. Dinner was finished, the kids were bathed, Lucas was already half asleep, and Emma was reading in her room with Beau curled up at the foot of her bed, but downstairs, something had already gone wrong. An electrical fault in the old wiring behind the kitchen walls had been sparking for hours, hidden behind plaster and tile, and by the time the first flame caught, it spread fast, faster than anyone could have predicted, racing up through the walls and into the ceiling of the east wing, and the smoke detectors didn't go off right away because the fire was buried inside the structure, eating through wood and insulation before it ever touched open air. But Beau knew, and that's the part that still gives people chills when they hear this story, because nearly 20 minutes before the alarms finally triggered, Beau started acting strange, pacing the hallway outside the kids' rooms, whining, scratching at the door, shoving his nose against the gap at the bottom and sniffing hard, and Rosa noticed and told him to settle down, thinking maybe he heard an animal outside, and Emma tried to call him back to bed. But Beau wouldn't come, he just kept pacing, kept whining, kept looking toward the stairs like he was waiting for something terrible to arrive. When the smoke finally became visible, creeping under the doors and curling up toward the ceiling, the alarms exploded all at once, and Rosa's heart nearly stopped because in an instant, the hallway was filling with grey haze and the smell of burning wood hit her so hard she could barely breathe, and she ran to the kids' rooms and grabbed Lucas first, scooping him up while shouting for Emma to follow, and Emma stumbled out of her room coughing, holding onto Beau's collar, and they started for the stairs, but the flames had already reached the first floor, and when Rosa looked down, all she saw was fire climbing the banister, and she realized in one horrifying moment that the main staircase was gone, they couldn't go that way. She pulled the kids back, searching her memory for the service stairs on the other side of the house, and she ran with them down the long hallway, smoke thickening with every step, and by the time they reached the service door, all three of them were coughing so hard they could barely stand, and Rosa shoved the door open and started down, holding Lucas tight, calling for Emma to stay close, and Emma tried to follow, but her foot caught on the top step and she went down hard, tumbling halfway. Before catching herself on the railing, and in that moment, something shifted. The smoke was too thick now, visibility was almost gone, and Rosa, already at the bottom with Lucas, screamed up for Emma, but she couldn't see her, couldn't hear her over the roar of the fire and the wailing alarms. Emma was on her knees on the stairs, dizzy, scared, unable to find which way was up, and that's when Beau appeared, pushing through the smoke like it didn't even matter, and he pressed his body against hers, nudging her forward, guiding her down step by step, refusing to leave her side, and when they finally stumbled out of a side door into the cold night air, Rosa grabbed Emma and pulled her across the lawn, sobbing, thanking God, clutching both kids like she would never let go, but then she looked around and realized Beau wasn't with them. He had stopped at the door, and when Rosa turned back, she saw him standing there at the entrance, ears up, looking into the fire, and she screamed at him to come, begged him, told him to run, but Beau just stood there for a second, and then he turned around and ran back inside, and no one understood why. What Rosa didn't know, what no one knew in that moment, was that Lucas had dropped something, his stuffed bear, the one he'd slept with every night since his mom gave it to him, and Beau had seen it fall, had watched it tumble from Lucas's arm somewhere near the top of the stairs, and for a dog who had spent years learning that these kids were his purpose, that bear wasn't just a toy, it was a piece of Lucas, and Beau was going back for it. The firefighters arrived within minutes, and by then the east wing was fully engulfed, flames shooting from windows, the roof beginning to buckle, and Rosa was hysterical, pointing at the house, telling them a dog was still inside, and most of them didn't react the way she hoped because in a fire like that, every second counts and no one risks a life for an animal, but one firefighter, a woman named Carla, saw the look in Rosa's eyes and understood that this wasn't just a pet, this was something more. Carla went in through a back entrance with her partner, crawling low through the smoke, and what she found still makes her voice shake when she talks about it. She found Beau on the second-floor landing, lying on his side, barely conscious, and beneath him, tucked under his body like he was protecting it from the flames, was that little stuffed bear, and around him, scorch marks on the floor showed just how close the fire had come before the hoses started pushing it back. They carried him out, and when Rosa saw him limp in the firefighter's arms, she dropped to her knees, and Emma started screaming Beau's name, and Lucas, too young to fully understand, just kept asking why Beau was sleeping, and that question broke something in everyone who heard it. They rushed Beau to an emergency vet, and for hours, no one knew if he would survive. Smoke inhalation had damaged his lungs, he had burns on his paws and his side, and the vet said it was touch and go, that the next 24 hours would decide everything. Richard got the call somewhere over the Pacific, and for the first time in years, he told his pilot to turn the plane around, and he spent the entire flight staring out the window, replaying every moment he had missed, every dinner he had skipped, every time he had walked past that dog without even stopping to pet him, and by the time he landed, something inside him had cracked open that he didn't know how to close. He went to the vet first, not the hospital, not even to see his kids, because something pulled him there, some need to understand what had happened. And when he walked into that small room and saw Beau lying on a metal table with tubes and wires and machines beeping around him, Richard just stood there, frozen, and the vet quietly explained what Beau had done, how he had gone back into the fire, how he had found that bear, how he had covered it with his own body, and how he had refused to leave, even when escape was possible. And Richard, this man who had built an empire, who had negotiated with world leaders, who had never once cried in a boardroom, he broke down right there, sobbing like a child, because he finally understood what he had overlooked for years, that the most loyal soul in his household had never been on his payroll, had never asked for recognition, had never needed a reason to love those kids other than the simple fact that they existed. The next few days were long and uncertain, but Beau held on, and slowly, his breathing steadied, his eyes opened more often, and one afternoon, when the vet finally allowed visitors, Emma and Lucas walked into that room and saw their dog lift his head for the first time, and Emma ran to him and buried her face in his fur and whispered thank you over and over, and Lucas, clutching that singed stuffed bear the firefighters had saved, laid it gently beside Beau's head like an offering, like a promise. Richard sold the mansion. He couldn't look at it anymore without seeing flames, without remembering what almost happened, and he bought a smaller place, a house with a big backyard, a house where he could actually hear his kids laughing from any room, and Beau spent his recovery there, slowly getting stronger, slowly learning to walk without limping, and Richard made a decision that no one expected. He stepped back from his company, handed control to his partners, and started spending his mornings doing something he had never done before, sitting on the back porch with a cup of coffee, watching his kids throw a ball for a dog who would chase it with everything he had left. Sometimes the biggest lessons come from the smallest hearts, and sometimes the ones who save us are the ones we never thought to thank, and if Beau could talk, he probably wouldn't say much anyway, because dogs like him don't do what they do for praise or reward, they do it because that's just who they are, and maybe that's the part of this story that stays with people the longest, not the fire, not the rescue, but the quiet truth that loyalty like that can't be bought, can't be trained, and can't be replaced. I keep thinking about that moment when Beau turned around and ran back in, and I wonder what would have happened if no one had gone after him, if he had just been left to face those flames alone, and that thought is almost too much to sit with. So I have to ask you, if you were standing in that doorway, watching someone you loved run toward danger, what would you have done? Would you have followed, or would you have frozen? Drop your answer in the comments because I really want to know, and if this story reminded you of someone who loves animals like family, or if you know a parent who needs to hear this tonight, please share it with them, because some stories are too important to keep to ourselves.